Benito Mussolini was the fascist dictator of Italy, who joined his country together with Nazi Germany in the Axis alliance. He was a close friend of Adolf Hitler, and the pair got on very well. He had been the Prime Minister of Italy from 1922 and then the dictator from 1925. He took his country into the Second World War, but following the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, Mussolini was deposed and placed under arrest. His nation then signed an armistice with the Allies, but after this he was rescued from prison in the Gran Sasso raid by German special forces. But then Hitler placed him in power of a German puppet state in northern Italy. But as the Allies took Rome and made their way to Florence, they began to advance towards northern Italy. Mussolini then went on the run, and he tried to cross the Swiss border, but he then joined a Luftwaffe convoy towards Germany. It's believed that he hoped to flee, and to make it to safety, but this would not be the case. He was arrested along with his mistress, Clara Petacci, and the pair would be brutally executed by a group of partisans at the side of a road. He was mown down by machine gun fire, but after his death, his remains and body were subjected to a brutal and savage ordeal, with the Italians in Milan taking out their hatred on Mussolini. But what is the story of this? Join us today as we look at the horrifying execution of Mussolini's body, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. A group of partisans attacked a convoy on the 27th of April 1945, in which Mussolini and Petacci were travelling on, close to the village of Dongo, near to Lake Como. They forced the Germans to hand over all Italians in exchange for allowing them to continue their journey, but slumped inside one of the vehicles was Mussolini. He was described as, his face was like wax, and his stare glassy, but somehow blind. I read utter exhaustion, but not fear. Mussolini seemed completely lacking in will, spiritually dead. He was placed under arrest and stayed in a local barrack, and then he was reunited with his mistress Petacci early in the morning. Over 50 fascists were found with their families and were arrested, but Mussolini was the most high profile. The partisans were worried that he would be rescued, and despite many of the other fascists being executed, the order to execute Mussolini was initially delayed. An announcement on Radio Milano stated, "The head of this association of delinquents, Mussolini, while yellow with rancour and fear and trying to cross the Swiss frontier, has been arrested. He must be handed over to a tribunal of people so it can judge him quickly. We want this, even though we think an execution platoon is too much of an honour for this man. He would deserve to be killed like a mangy dog." Many would later claim they ordered the execution of Mussolini, but it would be Walter Audisio, a communist partisan, who was tasked with carrying out the order. He was told to go and shoot him, and along with another man, Aldo Lampredi, the pair would be the ones who executed the former dictator and his mistress. They arrived in Dongo, and they then drove to collect Mussolini and Petacci from a farmhouse. With them in their convoy, they then drove 20 kilometres to an Italian village, and their truck pulled up at the entrance of the Villa Belmonte on a narrow road. Petacci and Mussolini were told to get out, and they were ordered to stand by the wall of the villa. At 4:10 p.m, armed with his machine gun, Audisio shot them dead with his weapon, after his own weapon jammed. It's claimed Mussolini's last words were, "Aim at my heart," but other accounts claim he said nothing. He lay dead on the road with his mistress, his body riddled with bullets, and in his final moments it was a long departure from his former image as a dictator. He used his body, either bare-chested or half-naked, as a symbol of power through his propaganda, but in his death his body would be treated with huge contempt and disrespect, and his body became a symbol of hatred of fascism and the evil of his regime. Hitler would later hear of the horrific posthumous ordeal that his body was subject to, and this would make the dictator of Nazi Germany's mind up. Hitler would decide that he would take his own life inside the bunker, then order his closest companions to destroy his body for him, to avoid it falling into the hands of the enemy. He also ordered this for his wife Eva Braun too, as Clara Petacci, Mussolini's mistress, would also have her body subjected to a terrible ordeal. In the evening of the 28th of April 1945, Mussolini and Petacci's body, along with 3 executed fascists, was placed on a truck and was then sent south to Milan. They arrived in the early hours of the 29th of April, and the bodies were then dumped on the ground of the Piazalle Loreto, a square near to the railway station. Here in August 1945, 15 partisans had been executed and shot dead, and the partisans saw the square as a symbolic place, and they wanted to bring Mussolini there to suffer the ultimate humiliation. The bodies of the partisans were then placed on public display, but Mussolini and Petacci's body, in retribution, would then be displayed too. The bodies were left in a heap, but by 9 a.m. in the morning, a huge crowd had gathered. People began to throw vegetables at the bodies, and they spat at them too. Some men even urinated on the corpses of Petacci and Mussolini, and many pulled out their pistols and shot at them. One woman felt that Mussolini wasn't dead enough, and she pulled out her pistol and fired 5 shots at close range into his head, 1 bullet for each son she had lost in the Second World War. Another man grabbed the body by the armpits, so that the crowd could see it, and tried to raise it up. The bodies were given a beating, with many kicking them in the face, to the point where Mussolini's face was heavily disfigured, and it would have been difficult to recognise him. At this time, American soldiers arrived, and a number of them had cameras, and managed to capture the moments the crowd had in great anger. One American claimed the crowd were out of control, and were depraved and sinister, but after a while in which the bodies were assaulted, they then had a rope attached to their feet, and they were then hung from a metal framework of a half-built service station. This was a method of hanging used in northern Italy to show intense shame of the executed, but Mussolini and Petacci's body, along with the other executed fascists, was strung upside down above the crowd. This was done allegedly to try and protect the bodies from the mob, but more projectiles rained down on them. The crowd wanted the bodies raised higher, and for them to be strung up to the hooks like pigs. The corpses were there hanging, like meat in a slaughterhouse, and Mussolini's mouth was wide open, whilst Clara Petacci's eyes stared motionless and creepily into the distance. At 2 p.m. the American authorities ordered the bodies to be cut down, and then transported to Milan's morgue. Autopsies were carried out, and sickeningly the bodies of Mussolini and Petacci were photographed arm in arm, covered in injuries from their ordeal. An autopsy was carried out the day after, and it was said that Mussolini was shot with 9 bullets, 4 near the heart, and are given as the cause of death. Samples of his brain were taken and were then sent to America for testing, but no autopsy was carried out on Clara Petacci. But the effects of Mussolini's death and public hanging was powerful, as Hitler, as mentioned, would make the decision to take his own life. It's believed by some historians that Mussolini's fate was a deciding factor in this, but after his death and display of his corpse in Milan, he was buried in an unmarked grave in a cemetery to the north of the city. But on Easter Sunday 1946, his body was disinterred and dug up by a young fascist and his 2 friends. It was moved for 16 weeks from place to place, and was even hidden at a monastery and a convent. But then the body with a leg missing was tracked down, and some friars were even charged with helping to hide the body. The body was then hidden at a Capuchin monastery for 11 years, and the location of the body was kept a secret. But then this was finally reinterred in the Mussolini family crypt on the 1st of September 1957, and when he was interred in his tomb, the supporters gave a fascist salute. His tomb is decorated with a marble head of his, and other symbols linked to fascism, and today it's become a site of pilgrimage. Mussolini was seen as a powerful. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.